Hello and welcome to another star rating video. This is for the mini set and it'll cover all of the cards from Dr. Boom's incredible inventions. Now don't worry that I'm a dismembered voice right now. I've moved my face camera just so that you can see all of the cards on the screen. So don't worry, the camera's still fine and I'm still fine. I'm not being held hostage doing this, I promise you. Anyway, as I said, I'm going to go through the star ratings of all of the cards from the mini set. Just as a reminder, in case you've not seen one of these from me before, normally I give 5 stars to cards I think that will go into tier 1 decks, 4 stars to cards I think will go into tier 2, 3 if I think it's going to go into tier 3, 2 is if it's going to go into tier 4, or it might see some play in some of the higher tier decks but will be dropped eventually, and then 1 star is basically this card won't see any play. A bit of spoilers ahead. I've only actually rated 1 card from the mini set 5 stars. It's not to say that I think the quality of the mini set is low at all, but I think there are some cards in here that kind of need some additional support, and there are some cards in here that I think will go into tier 2 and tier 3 decks, but won't elevate them into the tier 1 region. The other thing to let you know is that I'm treating some of my star ratings based on the leaked patch notes, which suggest that Bran is going to become a 8 mana minion, the Highlander reward, and that the Hunter card as well, Saddle Up, is going to be 4 mana. So I'm kind of making these ratings in mind of those 2 decks dropping down maybe slightly. Although I still think the Token Hunter deck is going to be pretty insane regardless. Alright, let's get this show on the road. First and foremost, we have the Death Knight cards. We have Toy Snatching Geist, Helm of Humiliation, and Foam Render. Toy Snatching Geist, 4 stars. I actually think this hand buff Death Knight deck, which is currently sitting, depending on the metrics you look at, somewhere around a tier 3 to like a low tier 2 region deck. And I actually think this card itself might push it into that tier 2 region. It's a very solid card. It lets you generate a very cheap minion potentially, which could then be used to flood the board with another minion. And all this deck really wants to do is create really disgusting board states and eventually break your opponent's back. And I think Toy Snatching Guys adds 1 additional card to the roster that can do that. So I think it's going to be 4 stars. Also important to note about this card, when I'm going to compare it to Helm, is this can go in what I think is the better version of the hand buff deck. And the better version of the hand buff deck is a rainbow deck. It runs a Blood Rune, a Frost Rune, and a Unholy Rune. And this is mainly for the Seamstress, because the Seamstress is a very good hand buff target as well. So because this has got 1 Unholy Rune, it will go into that deck, and I think it'll just slot in nicely. Now, Helm of Humiliation, on the other hand, you may have noticed by now, is 2 Blood Runes. And this can't slot into that deck. Now, there is a hand buff version that runs double blood, single unholy, but when I've looked at the metrics, I think it's lagging behind a little bit. So, because of that, I've only given this 2 stars. I think you'll see some testing, but eventually people will prefer to go for the rainbow deck, which excludes you running Helm. Then finally, we have Foam Render. Foam Render, also 4 stars. I think Foam Render will go into the Climactic Necrotic Explosion Rainbow Death Knight deck. I think it's going to go into any aggro Unholy deck. Sure, the aggro Unholy decks aren't doing very well right now, but actually if you look into the future, I think this card could be a real menace. It's a very efficient corpse spender. A lot of decks will love it. It can just slide into a lot of decks, honestly. It may even go into the hand buff deck. I don't think it will do, but you never know. Maybe it is 5 damage per turn every single turn. That's pretty spooky, right? Because of those reasons, the fact I think it's going to slot to multiple decks, and I think the Rainbow Death Knight deck might actually raise back up into the tier 2 region, because I think that Highlander Warrior is going to drop down in the rankings, and that the Highlander Warrior was kind of the gatekeeper of all these longer game value decks, so I think all of those decks will get a bump up in power level after the mini set and patch with it. Now we're going to Demon Hunter Land. We have Sock Puppet, Slither Spear, Return Policy, and Gibbering Reject. Sock Puppet, Slither Spear, also 4 stars. I think it's going to just slot straight into Window Shopper Demon Hunter, or any aggro Demon Hunter deck. It's a really solid card. There's a lot of good synergies, especially in the 2-drop department, that give your hero attack, and therefore if you put your Sock Puppet, Slither Spear, which is not going to be hard to remove on turn 1, right? It's going to be really hard to remove on turn 1 for some classes. On turn 2, this could have 3 attack. That's like, the typical vicious Slither Spear. It just doesn't require you to cast multiple spells. You may even run both in the same type of deck. I don't know, but I'm pretty certain this will find some place into an aggro deck. I think it's really good. So yeah, 4 stars. Sadly, Return Policy, I've given it only 2 stars. The only deck I think this is going to go into is Highlander Demon Hunter. Highlander Demon Hunter is not really even tier 3 at the moment based on the metrics. It could go into some sort of big demon Demon Hunter deck, but I just don't think that deck will work. I think you want the consistency of getting your Window Shopper. I think the Window Shopper is the big payoff demon from the deck. And obviously you don't need to return policy your weapon to get another Window Shopper, because you normally run 2 weapons anyway. You have a lot of weapon shooters, and there can only be 2 Window Shoppers in your deck, so eventually you'll start playing return policy for basically no value. So yeah, I think it'll be tested a little bit in some big Demon Hunter decks, but won't work. I think where it will really shine though is in the Highlander deck, especially the ones that run Jotun. If you get a repeat cast of return policy, that could potentially be a lot of value. Gibbering Reject, also sadly, only 1 star. I just don't see this card working. I don't think the support is there for it. Sure, you know, you can push your hero power for 1 mana, and you get a 5 mana 6/6 effectively split up as 3/3s. Is that good enough in Standard? No, I don't think it is. Because there's so few ways to multi-attack now in Demon Hunter, I just don't see Gibbering Reject working. That being said, it's a watch-out card. If they ever release like another multi-attack card for Demon Hunter, and attacking with multiple times with, you know, weapons and stuff, it's kind of in Demon Hunter's wheelhouse. Gibbering Reject could actually be a really insane card. It's just, right now, it ain't that. Now we go to Druid. We have Tarantus, Overgrown Beanstalk, and Snuggle Teddy. Tarantus and Snuggle Teddy, 1 star. I'm sorry to say this, I think both of them are kind of geared towards this longer range ramp Druid deck where you have big minions. Ramp Druid right now in a really sad spot. Mainly because a lot of the ramp cards have been removed from Druid, so they struggle to get to the higher mana costs, and then they also have a distinct lack of, you know, AoE removal. To be fair, that is kind of in Druid's wheelhouse as well, and currently the meta is super aggressive, so I think it's like the worst of both worlds. Not enough support for big Druid, and also the meta is super aggro, and that's my prediction right now, that after the sets, the mini set comes out and the nerfs come in, I think the meta will go super aggressive. So we're going to have on one side of things like control decks that can deal with early game minions, and on the other side these hyper aggro Paladin and Hunter decks. And I just don't see a world where Tarantus and Snuggle Teddy fit into it. And actually, to be fair, if it does work as a deck and it's, you know, it's better than like a tier 3 or a tier 4 deck, I think it's actually Snuggle Teddy that will power the deck. It's really efficient to deal with these token decks. It's a 2/4 taunt, it protects your face, it also gives you lifesteal, so, you know, you can heal back up a little bit, and just extend this game into the later game, and it also gives you a big minion, right, for the big Druid side of things. Tarantus, I just don't think is good enough. A 6 mana 7/7 taunt elusive is not good enough in Standard anymore. If you pay it, get the 14/14, sorry, and you play it on turn, well, when you have 10 mana crystals, sure, that's good, but at turn 10, a lot of decks can deal with these giant minions nowadays, especially the control decks, so I think just big minions with big stats isn't quite good enough for Standard. I know it has elusive as well, so it's a bit awkward to remove. And maybe I'm wrong, but I just don't actually think Druid will get to that stage in the game to play Tarantus for 14 stat line. So 1 star right now. But again, watch this space. Overgrown Beanstalk, funnily enough, I was going to give this 1 star as I was actually coming into preparing this video, but I've actually upped it up to 3 stars. It's going to be somewhere in this 1, 2, 3 star region, but I couldn't quite decide. I started putting together a deck for these cards, and this was kind of like how I was assessing whether or not I was going to put, you know, a tier 3 deck, a tier 2 deck, tier 1, so on and so forth. And I put together a Drum Druid list with like a tokeny middle to the Drum Druid list, and I was like, you know what? I actually don't hate this list. Like, I don't think it's that bad. Do I think it's that good? No, I think at the best it's tier 3. It may actually be in tier 4 as well, so this might be a 2-star card. But one of the things that the token Druid deck is missing is something like Soul of the Forest, the big refill engine. That has now rotated out. Maybe Overgrown Beanstalk can actually fulfill that niche. If your opponent ever leaves you with 2 treants or something on the board, you play the Overgrown Beanstalk. That's 3 mana, get a 2/2, draw 3 cards. That's really good value, so I think people will try this. I think it will end up falling over, though. And it's mainly because that the aggro decks will out-aggro you, and the control decks can deal with the Drum Circle turn when it's like a turn later, so it's kind of in a bit of a bad state in both ways. Some decks, though, you will just, like, you'll Drum Circle on 7 and you will just annihilate them. They won't be able to deal with it. Kind of what Drum Circle did in the past. Alright, now we move over to Hunterland. And Hunter, I think, has got the most exciting of the cards. Mainly in Bargain Bin and Product 9, but still, Wilderness Pack. and Product 9. I've given 4 stars to both of them. Now, Wilderness Pack, I very nearly gave 1 star to. But my own system, I think this might go into... It actually might go into a tier 1 deck, to be honest with you, but... I think it might go into Highlander Hunter. And I was actually looking at the metrics of Highlander Hunter, and it's the deck that is, like, just below Token Hunter, at least within the class. And it's got a pretty high win rate. Like, it's certainly in this tier 2 region. You could argue it's a tier 1 deck. And I think that deck would probably run a value card. They do run some other cards in there which are just value, like the bunch of bananas, that type of thing. Maybe they would drop one of them for a Wilderness Pack instead. Get 5 random beasts, try and high roll one of the beasts from another class, and maybe that's good enough for Hunter. So, just because I think it might slot into a Highlander Hunter deck, bearing in mind you would only have to run one of these as well, I've given it 4 stars, but I think it will see no play in any of the Hunter decks. So, it's literally 4 stars in one case, 1 star in all of the other ones. I don't think the pack's actually that good in general. Product 9, on the other hand, I think this will go into the one new deck we'll get from the miniset. Now, the miniset normally struggles to impact any effect on the meta generally, because you only get 3 cards for each class, right? Which is kind of why the dual class cards are a bit more fun for me, because you kind of pseudo get like 5 cards instead for each class instead. But we have no dual class cards this time, so we have just the 3 set cards for each class. Now, going into this set, I actually theorized that Secret Hunter might be a reasonable deck, but it was kind of missing a bit of support. And I think in the form of Product 9 and Bargain Bin, I think you get the support to run the Secret package. And I think the Secret Hunter deck, and I've been a bit generous here, I think it's going to slot into the low end of Tier 2. Maybe high Tier 3, but there's certainly a deck there. And Product 9 is a really solid card for that. There's a lot of good secrets in Hunter right now. Yeah, just a really, really efficient card. Bargain Bin, on the other hand... 5 stars! This is the 1 5-star card I've given for this set, and this might surprise you. This is a really, really good card. It's 2 mana, draw 2 cards. Now, normally with secrets, you can kind of play around it. With Bargain Bin, you can't really play around this. At some point, you have to play a minion or a spell, right? Because that's kind of like playing Hearthstone. Now, not every class plays weapons, admittedly. That's a good thing, though, because you put Bargain Bin in your deck where you want to tutor for a weapon. So this is 2 mana, draw 2, almost with a tutor on it, because you're almost certainly always going to get the weapon. Now, it's probably more close to like a 50-50, depends on the deck you're playing against, whether or not you'll get a minion or a spell with that, but just 2 mana, draw 2, and get a weapon, very good, especially when especially when one of the weapons has a secret synergy as well. So I think Bargain Bin is going to be straight into that secret deck. But I also think it's going to be running the Highlander deck. I honestly could see it being running the token deck as well. Like, it's a really nice... like mini refill. So for those reasons, I've given it 5 stars. I think it's going to go into a multitude of decks, and I think some of them might be tier 1 decks. So congratulations, Bargain Bin, on the 5 stars. Alright, now we go into Mageland. We have Malfunction, Buy One Get One Freeze, and Dark Moon Magician. Malfunction, 2 stars. People will test out no minion mage again. They'll realize it's not consistent enough. You'll win 1 in every 7 games, like, stupendously, and then cry when you lose the other 6 out of 7. So this card obviously helps the archetype. It was struggling to deal with the early game aggression. Malfunction is really good for dealing with all these token decks, but I just don't think the finisher is consistent enough for the deck to warrant running no minions in your deck. So, yeah, 2 stars. Now, I have to admit, Buy One Get One Freeze I've rated 3 stars too. When I did the reveals, I did not know this card's game. It's simple as that. And as soon as I finished the recording, I saw someone else talking about this card, and I was like, oh shoot, I forgot about that synergy. So I've actually given this 3 stars, because I know where this deck is going to go. And it's really stupid, because I was running the deck a week before I did the reveals. So this is going to go into Sith Rainbow Mage. How, you may ask? Well, it's this card, Watercolor Artist. I had been using Watercolor Artist to discount a Frozen Touch, so it would have a 0 mana spell. Because the current issue with Sith Mage is that you have to do, ideally more than 30 damage, but you have to do 30 damage in spells for 4 mana, with plus 7 spell damage, and it's actually pretty hard to do in Mage right now, considering the nerfs to the Snake Oils, right? So you kind of need to discount your spells in another way. The way I thought of doing this was, as I said, the Frozen Touch. You discount it as a Frost spell, get it down to 0, and that's your 0 cost spell, and it lets you go for the 30. How about instead, though, you do this on Buy One Get One Freeze? And you may be saying that, how does that help your problem? Well, instead of, freezing an opponent's minion, you freeze Sith and get a copy of it. And then suddenly you have spell damage 14, and then suddenly the additional 4 mana. Very easy to do 30 damage with, and actually 30 damage plus with that. So I actually think this Rainbow Mage deck will be a thing. It won't be as good as it was in the past. I actually think Mage still struggles to deal with these early game swarming decks. They're very good at dealing with single targets, but just not the AoE. So I think they still have big cries when they go up against Flood Paladin or the Token Hunter decks. But I still think it's going to be solid, so I put it into a tier 3 and a 3-star deck. Dark Moon Magician, 1-star. This is a meme. I'm sorry, this is a meme. I need say no more about this. I don't see it happening. Getting random spells that cost 1 more. Who knows what's going to happen? You might wipe your own board at some point. You might hit your own face. Who knows? It's just going to be chaos. Sometimes it'll pay off, but more often than not, it won't. So 1-star. All right, Paladin. Now, famously, at least, you know, within my small community, in the run into Whizbang's Workshop, I gave every single Paladin card from Whizbang's Workshop 1-star, and it ended up being a tier 1 and the numero uno deck from the release and got hot nerfed very quickly. So surely I won't make that same mistake again, right? 1-star to Whack-A-Mole, 1-star to Flickering Lightbox, and 1-star to Holy Glow Sticks. Okay, here's my reasoning for 1-starring Paladin again. I think Whack-A-Mole has almost no use in any of the current Paladin decks. Paladin has got access to a lot of good weapons. The Paintbrush, the Wind Fury weapon as well. Why would you get a weapon from the past, which normally inherently, because of the power creep of the game, is bad? And actually, I did look through the Paladin list, and I kind of joked about it, but there's a lot of bad weapons in the past of Paladin, so I just don't see why you would ever run Whack-A-Mole. So for that reason, I've given it 1-star. There are some high rolls, like we talked about Valinir in one of the reveals, but other than that, like, it's pretty bad. Flickering Lightbot, I think actually has got a potential for the future, just not for the present. There's not really a good enough mech synergy right now with Paladin to warrant running it in a mech-focused deck, and I don't think the Holy Spell package is good enough to fill your deck with Holy Spells to discount the Flickering Lightbot and the gigantic form of it as well. And this is kind of similar to why I've rated Holy Glow Sticks a bit low as well. I don't think this Holy Spell deck is good enough. Therefore, I've given both of these 1-stars. But it's kind of a watch this space, especially on the Holy Glow Sticks. Because 1 mana deal 4 damage potentially to the face is actually really, really oppressive. Or it has the potential to be oppressive. Unfortunately, and maybe fortunately, depending on how you want to look at it, Paladin doesn't have good access to spell damage. But if they ever get access to spell damage, this card could become a problem. Like, a serious problem. But for now, 1-star to both of them. Now we're going to Priestland. Funhouse Mirror, Delayed Product, and Puppet Theatre. Funhouse Mirror, 4 stars. I think Highlander Priest deck is going to surprise some people. It's kind of just been stewing there with pretty solid stats. The only issue was it couldn't ever beat Highlander Warrior. Like, it was almost impossible to beat it. But as I said, if the Highlander Warrior decks all drop off, you see fewer of them, Priest will rise up. And Priest is a very good deck, and it's one of the few classes, in my opinion, that can deal with these swarms of early game minions, and then just simply outvalue most of the other decks. I think Funhouse Mirror is very good for this. You attack an opponent's minion, you potentially get the copy of the minion, or maybe you clear it up with something else, or in the case it has a Death Rattle, you'll get the Death Rattle yourself. But 3 mana clearer guide for Priest, especially in a Highlander deck, it's probably going to make the cut of the 30 cards, right? So 4 stars to that. Puppet Theatre, this might surprise you. I've only given this 2 stars. I don't think this will make the cut for Highlander Priest, and it's kind of for the reasons I've mentioned before. I think the meta might go hyper-aggressive, and Puppet Theatre is just too slow. 4 mana do nothing is too slow. So I think you're more likely to see this in Control Priest that isn't Highlander. And I think that deck will lose to the Highlander deck. I think that will have more value in it than just a pure control form. The problem with Control Priest and actually control decks in general is how do you win the game eventually? Normally it's just that your opponent will run out of stuff eventually because you're using like 1 card to clear up their like 4 or 5 cards, and eventually, you know, their back will break, they'll have nothing else to play, and even just putting like a minion on the board is too much for them to deal with. Puppet Theatre, maybe if the meta slows down a little bit, we'll get into the Highlander deck as well, but I'm not convinced by it. The best case I can think of is if another Highlander deck rises to the top, and I don't mean Highlander Warrior here, I'm actually thinking Highlander Shaman. There might be a reason to put Puppet Theatre in your Highlander Priest deck to copy the Highlander reward from Shaman, so you also get the weapon, because the weapon for that deck is kind of bonkers, honestly. And then Delayed Product, 1 star. This is just not a good card. I don't think I need to explain why this isn't a good card. Alright, into Rogueland. We have Twisted Pack, Dubious Purchase, and Dust Bunny. Twisted Pack, 2 stars. I think this will see some testing, but it's just not enough reward for playing cards from other classes. It's going to be this or the card whose names I've forgotten now, the 2 mana 3/2 that discovers a spell from another class that costs 3 less. And realistically, this is going to be used for getting Velorox off, right? I don't think it's the best way of doing it. I mean, you are generating cards from other classes, and the nice thing about, or the thing you want to do with tests, and normally tests is in these decks, is you want to specifically pick certain cards. The nice thing about it being temporary is if you get one of these cards you don't want to play with tests, it goes away eventually, right? You don't have to worry about it. But I just don't think the test stream is going to happen. I think this, like, it's not really even a Contraband Rogue deck, but this, like, mining, super high value test deck, at the very best, I think it's tier 3, but I think it's actually more close to a tier 4 deck, so for those reasons, also I don't think Twisted Pack will necessarily make that list. For those reasons, I've given it 2 stars. Certainly people will play with it. It's not bad. If there's ever another synergy for cards from random classes, like another test-like synergy, then sure, Twisted Pack will probably rise up the rankings, but for now, I think 2 stars is fair enough. Due to his purchase, I've actually given 3 stars to. I think this will slot into a lot of rogue decks. It's just that the rogue decks right now aren't super good. It's pretty efficient, you know, 4 mana draw 3 cards. Even without the combo effect, 4 mana draw 3 is not the worst thing in the world. The combo, the destroy random enemy minion, is pretty nice. Yeah, I think 3 stars is fairly fair. And then Dust Bunny, I'm sorry, I love you dearly, but 1 star. I just don't see why you would play this card in your deck. Now, obviously the reason for this card is to generate low-cost cards to use for combos, but in that case, you would use Greedy Partner instead, and get coins which are by far better combos than the rock, the banana, or the knife from the Dust Bunny, so for those reasons, I just don't see Dust Bunny seeing any play. Now we go to Shaman Land, and I was very high on the Shaman cards. Murloc Growthin, 4 stars. The other 2 cards, by the way, Rocket Hopper and Wave of Nostalgia. Murloc Growthin, I actually think might be the best card in the set, but unfortunately the deck won't quite get to tier 1. This card is actually insane, and there's some insane potential high-value plays from the Murloc Growthin. Namely with Shudder Block, so I think there might be some sort of Shudder Block Shaman deck. I think more realistically this is going to go into Highlander Shaman at first. 1 mana, kind of 2-2, do 1 damage quickly. I know it's not quite that, it's actually pretty good stat lines for the cost. And then just the big boy, the 8 mana 16/16, where 8 of it is Rush. That is incredible. And if you Shudder Block that and you get, you know, the 32/32 stat line, that's incredible. And one of the things that Shudder Block decks were missing was this big battle cry turn. Like, they just lacked the big battle cry. And I think Murloc Growthin fits the bill. Rocket Hopper, I've actually only given 3 stars to. And I nearly choked when I did the reveal on this card, because I was like, this is insane. It's a 5 mana 10/10. When I tried to put together some decks, though, I actually cut it from my Highlander Shaman list. I don't think it quite makes the cut. Because if you're going to put that in the deck, you kind of need to put a bit of your Overload package into the deck, and you can only run one-offs of the cards, so it's unlikely you get the combos together. When you don't run it as a Highlander deck, and instead you go for this more Overload synergy, I feel like there's just a card missing, like one final finisher for your Overload synergy, that will take this Overload Shaman deck from this, like, tier 3 range, which is where I think it'll land in, to like this tier 2, tier 1 region. It's just missing a finisher. I think Rocket Hopper will go into this deck. I think it's a really good card, but it's just not quite ready. It's more like Watch This Space, but the card is good now, but Watch This Space, this card could be insane in the future. Wave of Nostalgia, on the other hand, 1 star. I think this card just won't be good enough. There is merit in certain metas to transforming your opponent's minions. That is true, but there are some situations where you're going to low roll and give them insane legendaries from the past. On the flip side, there are ways to play these more zoo-like Shaman decks. They're not great right now, and if you Wave of Nostalgia your board, you could be disappointed because legendary minions from the past, because of the power creep in the game, aren't normally as good as the ones from the future or the present, so yeah, anything with a symmetric effect with 5 mana, it could always lead to tears. It just depends on where the meta sits, and I don't think the meta sits particularly nicely for it right now. I think the most likely place this will get played is actually in the Highlander Shaman deck again, with Hagatha in that list as well, where Hagatha can give you what did it give you? A slime that casts the spell, and at least you'll get the slime hit with the legendary minion from the past effect. I still think that it's going to be a little bit too niche though, so for those reasons, 1 star. Alright, now we go into Warlock Land. And Warlock, I honestly kind of wanted to give most of these cards a question mark, because I have no idea. I just don't have an idea. So mass production, on some parts of the internet are going like, this card is insane, it's disgusting, I want to throw up. And on other parts of the internet is saying, this is garbage, why have they printed this? I sit somewhere in the middle. I think there is a reason to run this mass production in decks. Is it going to be good enough to make that deck viable? I'm not entirely certain. For that reason, I've given it 2 stars. I think this will see some testing, and it may either be a 5-star card or a 1-star card. There's like no in-between in it. Now, there is an obvious thing, and this is kind of what like, confused me. You are drawing 2 cards for 1 mana. True. That's pretty good value, right? But you're putting 2 cards back into your deck, so you're not really drawing through your deck. So it's not that good in the fatigue deck. There is an argument to be made to put it into the sludge deck, right? Because they destroy the deck. But you're shuffling your own deck, and you don't want to shuffle your sludge deck, so it doesn't go into that deck. Where I think it might see some play is, maybe it goes into the Pain Warlock deck, or any tokeny, aggro, whatever you want to call it, zoo Warlock deck out there. And you use this as just like quick draw, quick refill of your hand, play some, you know, overstatted big boys like the Infernal we're going to get up to in a minute. And eventually you'll get to a point like, you know, 8 mana crystals, 9 mana crystals, where your deck is mainly mass productions and you lose. But you never intended to go to that point in the game anyway, so it kind of doesn't matter that you're getting the 2 copies into your deck. The flip side as well is that you could maybe run this into like a wheel-lock deck, a slower deck. Try and draw through your deck with mass productions, and eventually when you've got your wheel and you've got enough of your board clears or your stalls, whatever you want, you just destroy the mass productions all at once. The other fun thing I've got planned, and this is kind of, I might run this as a deck on the release, funnily enough, is kind of this aggro deck that I mentioned with mass production, but eventually you just use Archvillain Reform and turn all the mass productions and all the rest of the cards in your deck into random legendary minions. If you don't zoo them down, then you just play random legendary minions each turn, and maybe that'll just take you over the top. Who knows? Anyway, I think it's more likely to go towards this 1-star region, so I've only given it 2. Domino Effect, 3 stars. I think this is going to go into Control Warlock, especially if the meta is very token-focused or very aggro-focused, and currently it is pretty aggro-focused. The only downside to this card is that it's pretty easy to play around it, especially for spell token hunter, whatever you want to call it, because it won't jump over a location, I believe. So if you just put your location in the middle of all your tokens, you can actually interrupt the domino effect. That being said, there's a lot of other options, there's a lot of additional cards with it, so I think it's going to see some play. I don't think Control Warlock is going to be particularly good, but maybe I'm wrong. I think it may be around this tier 3 region. Infernal was the other card I want to give a big question mark to. I actually don't know. It kind of depends on the Hearthstone Spaghetti Code how good this card is. I tentatively sat on the fence at 3 stars with this. The obvious deck this is going to go into is Pain Warlock, because you're already hitting yourself in the face, right? So at turn 4, realistically, you may have done 10 damage to yourself already. You might as well do 5 more damage to get a 4-mana 6/6 taunt out. And there is some potential disgusting turns of playing, you know, a 3-mana, 4/5 into a 4-mana 6/6. The only thing I don't know, and it's kind of because of the wording of Molten Giant, if you set your remaining health to 15, does Molten Giant go back up to 20? If it does, this card might not see any play. If it doesn't, and it's Spaghetti Code and it treats it based on you having 30 health, and aka you still get a 15 mana discount on this, then I think this Infernal will actually be very good in the Pain deck. So I'm going to test this out on the opening deck. I've got a deck with both Infernal and Mass Production in it, so we'll see. Either both of these are 1-star, or both of these might be like 4 or 5 stars. I just don't know yet. Alright, and then finally for the classes, we have Warrior. We have Standardized Pack, Part Scrapper, and Safety Expert. Standardized Pack, 1-star. I just don't think Warrior has a reason to run this. In the past, Control Warrior decks would like this, but Control Warrior decks now want to play Odin and just play a bunch of armor gaining cards. They don't want to mess about with taunt minions, especially random taunt minions from other classes. Who cares? So yeah, 1-star. Part Scrapper, this might surprise you. I think this card is insane. I think the potential high roll on it is disgusting and will probably just lose you some games. I've actually only given it 3 stars though, and the Safety Expert 3 stars. Mainly because the archetype as a whole is a tier 3 deck still. Now, there will be some times on turn 2 or turn 3, you're going to get these Firework Experts out, you're going to get these... you're going to get Safety Experts out early as well, and your opponent is going to vomit and cry and pee and poo everywhere. More often than not, though, you're not going to hit that combo, right? I don't know what the percentages are. I suspect it's somewhere around the low 40 regions to get both Part Scrapper and Safety Goggles in your hand at the same time by turn 3, turn 4 region. Someone else can run the maths. If you do that, then potentially you can keep up with the aggro decks, and my gut feeling is that aggro decks will still ruin this deck. I played this deck a lot in the early set, and it was really the aggro decks I just couldn't beat, and I started taking cards to deal with aggro, even in this deck, which I felt was more tempo-orientated. But maybe if you cheat out a huge mech, especially one with Taunt, maybe that will just be the level playing field you need, but I'm actually not certain about it, so for that reason, even though Part Scrap is an insane card, I don't think the deck will be there for it. And the other thing about this is, I don't think it would have been great in Highlander Warrior anyway, because you could only run it as a one-of, and there's not that many mechs in the Highlander Warrior deck. I mean, it is really just Ziliax, right? So it would be an ultra-specific combo, and then I don't think Control Warrior will necessarily run this, but I think if this card ends up being like a 4 or 5 star card, it will be in Control Warrior, like with Odin, and maybe you try and run like a Ziliax and maybe some other of the mech package into that control deck. But it's not just gaining armor and hitting him in the face, right? So I'm not convinced you will actually put that into your deck anyway. Finally, we have neutrals. We have Pro Gamer, Exploding Air, Puppet Master Dorian, Building Block Golem, and the Replicator Innator. Alright, 3 of these I think should be pretty obvious to you right now. Pro Gamer, Exploding Air, and Building Block Golem, all 1 star. Pro Gamer is actually just a terrible card. It's 5 memes out of 5, or whatever you want to call 6 memes out of 9. But any card that's a 33% chance to be 2 mana, 2/3, your opponent draws 2 cards, is not good, so this won't see any play. Exploding Air, I don't think there's enough of a bomb synergy in the game right now. There's just 1 card in Warrior, so I just don't think you'll put Exploding Air in that deck. It also doesn't have a tribe. If it had mech on it, then maybe you could do some things with it. But simply put, I just don't think you'll focus too heavily on this bomb synergy. Now, there are some meme things you could potentially try and set up where you do Califero to try and turn a board full of tokens into Exploding Airs that shuffle 5 or 6 or 7 bombs into your opponent's deck. Sure, you can try that, but I think there's more disgusting things you can do with Califero. And actually, Califero is kind of hard to set up, and it's proven to be very hard to do anything with it. Full stop. And I don't think this mini set is going to help it in any way. Building Block Golem is a really good arena card. I just don't think it's quite good enough for standard. I think it's actually pretty close to being good enough for standard, especially for decks that don't have good removal, aka Druid. Maybe they might try running Building Block Golem, but it's still only single target removal. I don't think it's going to be good enough. And then random 1-cost minions, I think the value of a 1-cost minion that doesn't have the battle cry on it is actually like closer to half a mana than it is to 1 mana, so it's pretty good, but not quite good enough for standard. And now the final 2 legendaries. Replicator Innator, 2 stars. I think people will play with this, and I've heard talk of meme decks, and there are meme decks. For example, if you play Hodor, and then on your next turn you play Replicator Innator and 2 South Sea deckhands, that is 32 damage charge. It is only a 4-card combo, but you need 2 turns to do it. I think this is going to be a meme, and it's also unfortunate that it's in Hunter, because normally when you have these combo decks, you build it around the control deck. Control Hunter, not really a good thing, right? So I think it's a bit of a meme archetype. And then when I was just trying to put in, like, or at least when I was looking through the decks that currently exist, and I was like, would I slot the Replicator Innator into this deck? I just couldn't find any of the good decks that would take this card. I actually think the best bet for this to be just a solid, okay pick is in something like Highlander Paladin, where you do have all of these big, beefy minions. The Highlander reward for Paladin rewards you having these big, high-value minions. But I just don't think the meta is suitable for it. Like I said, it's hyper-aggressive. Typically when the meta is hyper-aggressive, value is not very good. And that's kind of my theory. I just don't think the classes are there for it. I think if you're going to see it, though, it's going to be somewhere between Hunter and maybe Paladin will play it. I just don't see it anywhere else. And then finally, Puppet Master Dorian, which I said before the set was going to break the game. And you may have alluded to this by the fact that I said that only 1 card has 5 stars. This isn't a 5-star rating. I've given it 4 stars, though. I actually am not entirely certain how it's going to break the game yet. I've put a few theory-crafted decks out there with Dorian in it. But it's going to be consistency is the key for this card. And I don't think there is a deck out there right now that's consistent enough to abuse Dorian. I may be wrong, though. It is the prime example of a card that could break the game in some way. Like, one of the examples I was actually thinking of was if you play like character artist to draw the highest cost minion in your deck, and you're Highlander Warrior, for example, and your reward is just being nerfed to 8 mana, if you Dorian into the character artist, you can get Bran for a 1 mana 1/1 then, because you will guarantee draw your Bran, and then that's more palatable to play it at that mana cost. You do have to wait till turn 9 to do this, I think, for character artist. I believe that's a 5 mana card, but maybe that's worth it, because at least you're playing for 9 mana. Like, I can't remember the stat line of character artist, but it's like 5/11 of stats. It's not fantastic, but it's not absolutely awful. And your opponent has to kill Dorian. Like, that's the other nice thing about this Dorian. Your opponent has to deal with it. They can't just leave it up. It has a little bit of more and poor about it. I think a lot of decks will try just play this on 4 and just hope it lives till 5. But I think the cutoff point for that, I think a lot of decks by turn 5, or like 5 mana crystal, sorry, will be able to deal 6 damage and deal with the Dorian. Because that's kind of what happened with More and Poor as well, right? A lot of decks could just deal with it, so I don't know exactly how this is going to break the game, but I still maintain this will break the game in some way. My gut feeling is that the deck that's going to abuse this the most, at least off the get-go, is Rogue. In part because of Sonya. You're getting 1 mana 1/1 copies of cards. Sonya can copy 1 mana cards, so you then copy it again for a 0 mana 1/1. That seems like a lot of value, but I think you'll get to the point eventually with that deck, and it's certainly when I was making these decks. It's just too much value. You won't be able to hold all the cards, so I'm not sure this might actually be a bad card in the end, but watch this space. This card has got real break-the-game potential. And that'll do for the star ratings. Let me know what decks you're looking forward to. Let me know as well if you think any of my card ratings are like highly off the mark. Maybe like, oh, Exploding Air synergizes with this deck and you forgot about it, you fool. And I'll discuss it in the comments with you, maybe. Maybe I'll try it out on the opening day. We'll see. Anyway, thanks for joining me, and I'll see you with the mini set release. Sorry, not reveal anymore. We've revealed it all. Release, which is happening tomorrow. Bye.